He thought she was stealing, a small girl hiding bread inside an oversized coat. But when he followed her into the winter quiet, he learned the truth. She wasn't hungry for herself. She was feeding someone else's survival. And that single loaf shattered everything he believed about help, strength, and silence. Briarport's winter didn't scream. It pressed. Snow softened the harbor sidewalks into pale, uneven sheets, and the wind off the ferry docks carried a salt-cold hush that made every sound feel louder than it should. Across the street, Rowan and Rye Bakery glowed like a small miracle gold light, fogged windows, and the warm breath of bread drifting out each time the door opened. Cade Whitlock slowed without meaning to. He told himself it was nothing. A harmless pause, a businessman's brain taking inventory. But he wasn't studying the bakery. He was watching a child. She stood near the front display, bundled in a coat too big for her frame, sleeves swallowing her wrists. A knit cap tugged low over curls that kept slipping free. She didn't beg, didn't stare at customers with sad eyes. She simply waited still as a statue until the clerk turned to restock the shelves. Then her hand moved. Not frantic, not greedy, careful. A single loaf slid from the basket into the open fold of her coat, like she'd practiced the motion 100 times. She didn't look around for approval. She didn't smirk. She didn't run. She only closed her coat and exhaled slow, controlled, like she'd been holding her breath all day, and finally allowed herself one tiny release. Cade felt a sharp pinch of irritation. Then something stranger. Confusion. Because this didn't look like a bad kid. It looked like a kid trying to be quiet so the world wouldn't notice she needed anything. The bell above the bakery door chimed as Cade stepped inside. Warm air wrapped around him. The girl's eyes lifted. They were steady. Too steady. And Cade realized he wasn't looking at a thief. He was looking at a child carrying a secret heavier than bread. Cade didn't raise his voice. He didn't block the door. He didn't step close enough to make her flinch. He just said gently, "Hey, sweetheart, I saw that." The girl froze, breath held. Then slowly she opened her coat to show him the loaf. No lies. No drama. A simple, silent confession. "I can pay," she said. Her voice was soft but steady, like she'd decided a long time ago that panic was a luxury. With what Cade asked. She reached into her pocket and unfolded a small stack of bills and coins, smoothed flat, carefully, counted, kept together like something precious. It wasn't nearly enough, but she held it out anyway, as if effort deserved respect. Cade's throat tightened. He glanced toward the clerk, who was watching with cautious concern. Cade lifted a hand. "It's okay," he told the clerk. "I've got this." Then he looked back at the girl. "What's your name?" She hesitated, eyes flicking to the door as if measuring distance. Then she answered, "Juniper." "But—" "Junie." Junie, Cade repeated softly. "Why the bread?" Junie's fingers pressed against the loaf through her coat, protective. Not possessive. Protective. "I didn't want trouble," she said quickly. I'm not here to shame you," Cade said, keeping his tone calm. "I'm here to understand." That word understand hit Junie like a surprise. Her shoulders loosened a fraction. She swallowed. "It's not for me," she admitted. Cade held his breath. "Who's it for?" Junie looked down, then up again as if deciding whether he was safe enough for the truth. "My brother," she said. "Miles." Cade nodded once. "Okay." Junie blinked, startled by how simple his response was. Then she added, barely above a whisper, "He's waiting." And in that single sentence, Cade felt the whole world tilt because it didn't sound like hunger. It sounded like responsibility. Cade didn't ask where she lived first. He didn't press for details. He didn't make her repeat anything that might feel like a confession. He simply nodded toward the counter. "Let's do this the right way," he said. "Pick what you need. I'll cover the rest." Junie's chin lifted, pride flashing like a shield. I didn't ask you to. I know, Cade said, quiet and steady. You offered to pay. I'm just helping the math work out. Junie stared at him, weighing his words with the seriousness of someone who couldn't afford a mistake. Finally, she nodded once. At the counter, Cade paid for the loaf. Then, without making it a performance, he added a small cup of soup that would stay warm for a while, plus 2 soft rolls. The clerk slipped an extra napkin into the bag, eyes, kind voice, gentle. No lectures, no scolding, just human decency. Junie took the bag with both hands like it was fragile hope. Cade stepped back so she didn't feel cornered. Where's Miles right now? He asked carefully. Junie's answer came fast, like she'd prepared it. Upstairs with Ms. Darlene. She watches him after school. Good, Cade said. That sounds responsible. Junie blinked at the word. Responsible. Adults rarely used that word about her. Cade reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple card. This is a community center nearby, he said. They have quiet rooms and after-school help, if you ever want options. Junie didn't take it immediately. Her eyes narrowed. Why are you doing this? Cade's voice softened. Because you shouldn't have to be brave about bread. Junie's throat moved. She looked away fast, as if hope might embarrass her. Cade added, I'll walk with you to the building. I won't go upstairs. I just want to make sure you get there safely. Junie hesitated, then nodded. Okay, she whispered. And as they stepped back into the snow, Junie held the bag close, not like stolen goods, like a promise she couldn't afford to break. Outside, the cold met them like a door closing. Snow skimmed across the sidewalk in thin ribbons, and the harbor wind carried a sharp, clean sting that made Cade's cheeks tighten. Junie walked half a step ahead, small boots tapping a steady rhythm, like she was keeping time for a plan that couldn't slip. Cade didn't crowd her. He stayed just close enough to be present, far enough to be respectful. They passed a bus stop with a cracked schedule board, then a convenience store with a flickering neon sign. Junie's eyes tracked every doorway, every corner, quiet, alert, not scared. Prepared. Does Miles like bread? Cade asked softly. Junie nodded without looking back. He likes warm things. Soup, too, sometimes. Junie's voice caught on the word, as if sometimes was an entire strategy. It has to be the same brand, the same temperature. If it's different, he gets overwhelmed. Cade let the word land and settle. He'd seen powerful adults fall apart over stock prices. He'd seen boardrooms panic over rumors. But this little girl was describing how she kept a 5-year-old calm with routine. Junie adjusted the bag in her arms. He's not difficult, she added quickly, like she'd heard that label before. Cade's heart pinched. He's not difficult, he agreed. He's a kid who likes what helps him feel steady. Junie slowed. Not much. Just enough to show she'd heard him. They reached an older apartment building near the harbor, clean steps, working lights, a lobby that smelled faintly of laundry detergent. Nothing dramatic, just modest. Junie stopped at the entrance and looked up at Cade. You're not coming upstairs, she said, firm but not rude. Cade lifted his hands a little, palms open. I won't. I just want to make sure you get inside. Junie studied his face like she was reading fine print. Then she nodded once and turned to the door buzzer. Ms. Darlene, Junie said into the intercom. It's me. A warm voice answered immediately. Junie, come on up. The lock clicked. Junie stepped in, then paused, as if leaving him outside felt like stepping over a line she hadn't decided to cross. Junie climbed 2 stairs, then stopped and glanced back down at Cade. She didn't smile. She didn't invite him. But her eyes asked a quiet question. Are you leaving? Cade answered with his posture. He stayed near the lobby entrance, hands visible, not pushing. A woman appeared at the top of the stairwell, mid-40s, kind eyes, cardigan buttoned wrong like she'd dressed fast. She looked from Junie to Cade with the protective caution of someone who'd learned to be careful with children who weren't hers. Junie, the woman asked. You okay? Junie lifted the bakery bag. I got it. The woman's gaze softened, then sharpened again at Cade. And you are? Cade nodded calm. Cade, I saw Junie at Rowan and Rye. She was short on money. I covered the rest. I walked her here to make sure she got home safely. Junie's chin lifted. I wasn't stealing, she said quickly. I was. Ms. Darlene held up a hand, gentle. Honey, you don't have to explain like you're on trial. The words hit Junie like a blanket. Junie's shoulders relaxed a fraction. Ms. Darlene looked at Cade again. Thank you, she said, measured and sincere. But we're careful around here. As you should be, Cade replied. I'm not asking to come in, I'm leaving now. Junie's eyes widened, almost offended by how easily he respected the boundary. Ms. Darlene nodded slowly, as if that mattered. Miles is inside, she said to Junie. He's coloring. He asked when you'd be back. Junie's face softened instantly at the name. Cade watched it happen the way love changed her from guarded to gentle in one breath. Junie started up the stairs. Halfway, she paused and looked back again, voice smaller. You're not mad. Cade shook his head. No, Junie, I'm not mad. Junie swallowed. Okay. She disappeared into the apartment. Cade stepped out into the snow, but he didn't feel finished. Not because he wanted control. Because he'd just met a child who carried herself like the emergency plan, and something in Cade couldn't unsee it. That night, Cade placed the bakery receipt on his kitchen counter, like it was evidence in a case he didn't know how to close. His house was quiet in the way expensive things often were, polished, spacious, designed to keep chaos outside. He tried to return to normal emails, schedules a call with an assistant about next week's gala, but the receipt stayed there. A loaf, soup, 2 rolls. It wasn't the amount. It was the care. Junie hadn't grabbed the fanciest pastry. She hadn't taken extras. She'd taken what worked, what would travel, what would stay warm, what would be predictable. Cade poured a glass of water and stared out at the dark yard, snow turning the world into a blank page. He remembered another kitchen years ago, smaller, messier, alive. A child's hands smoothing a napkin. A small voice saying, "Later, Daddy. Save it for later." Cade's throat tightened. His daughter had saved things too. Not because she didn't have enough, because she was afraid the good parts of life were temporary. He hadn't noticed soon enough. Not back then. Now Junie's later wasn't fear dressed up as a joke. It was planning a child doing adult math. Cade picked up his phone, then paused. He didn't want to report her like she was trouble. He didn't want to rescue her like she was a headline. He wanted to be responsible. He searched for Briarport Community Center. He searched for a family advocacy nonprofit. He found a number for a child-focused support liaison. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He asked for guidance. Not power, not control, guidance. When the email confirmation came through, Cade looked at the receipt one last time. He didn't throw it away. He folded it carefully and put it in his wallet, where it could remind him every day what a child's quiet hands had tried to carry alone. Cade returned to Rowan and Rye 2 mornings later before the ferry crowds arrived. The bakery felt different in daylight. Less miraculous, more honest. He spoke quietly with the owner, then left a simple request written on a card, bread available for any child who comes up short. No questions, no signs, no announcements, just a quiet safety net. As Cade turned toward the door, the bell chimed again. Junie stood there, snow-dusting her boots, the same oversized coat zipped tight. She stopped when she saw him, eyes narrowing, not afraid, just alert. "You followed me," she said. Cade shook his head. "I came back." "There's a difference." Junie watched him carefully. Why Cade didn't rush the answer. "Because I kept thinking about how carefully you held the bread. Junie glanced down at the floor. I didn't want it to get crushed. I know, Cade said. I wanted you to know you don't have to hide it anymore. He slid a small card across the counter, not money. An address, a phone number. Community center, he said. They have quiet rooms, after school help and meals. You don't have to go today. Or ever. I just wanted you to have options. Junie didn't touch the card. Options get taken away. Cade met her gaze. Only if someone else controls them. These are yours. Junie studied him, weighing tone as much as words. Then she tucked the card into her pocket, not like a promise, but like a possibility. Is this charity? She asked. No, Cade said. It's support. Junie's mouth pressed into a thin line. Those aren't the same. Cade nodded. You're right. Junie hesitated, then asked the question that mattered most. Will they make Miles sit in loud rooms? Cade's voice stayed steady. They'll ask what helps him feel calm. Junie's shoulders lowered just enough to notice. She picked up a small bag of rolls from the counter, paid what she could, and looked at Cade. Later, she said quietly. Cade answered the same way. Later. The Briarport Community Center smelled like clean floors and crayons. Cade arrived early, making sure everything was arranged the right way, open space, clear sightlines, adults present, doors open. When Junie came in with Ms. Darlene, she paused at the threshold, scanning the room. Miles sat at a small table near the window, lining crayons into neat color gradients. He didn't look up right away. Junie knelt beside him. Hi, she whispered. Miles nodded once, eyes still on the crayons. Is it loud? Junie glanced around, then shook her head. No. It's okay. Cade approached, slowly stopping a few steps away, so Miles could see him without feeling crowded. Hi, Miles, he said. I'm Cade. Miles considered him. Are you fast? Cade blinked, then smiled gently. I can be slow. Miles nodded, satisfied. Cade sat across the table, hands flat where Miles could see them. He set down a small thermos. This is soup, he said. It stays warm. You can have it later. Miles stared at the thermos. Later is better, he said. Junie smiled, the expression small but real. Later, she agreed. A counselor named Lena approached, voice calm. Miles, we have a quiet room if you want to draw there. Miles looked to Junie. Junie nodded. I'll be right here. Miles stood and followed Lena without protest. Junie exhaled. Cade watched her carefully. You did a lot of work for him, he said. Junie shrugged. Someone has to know the rules. Kids shouldn't have to write the rules, Cade replied softly. Junie didn't answer. She stared at the empty chair where Miles had been. After a moment, she asked, If this works, will it stop? Cade shook his head. We'll review it, adjust it. Nothing disappears without warning. Junie's eyes flickered. No surprises. No surprises, Cade promised. Junie nodded once. And for the first time, she stayed seated. No coat clutched, no bag hugged close, just a child sitting still in a place that felt almost safe. They sat by the window while snow drifted down like slow feathers. Junie folded her hands into her sleeves, watching people pass outside. Adults usually try to fix things fast, she said. Then they leave. Cade leaned back, giving her space. I'm not here to fix you. Junie glanced at him. Then what are you here for? To build something that doesn't fall apart when I step back. Junie frowned. Everything falls apart. Cade nodded. That's why plans matter. Junie's voice dropped. Plans change, they do, Cade agreed. So we make them flexible and we check in. Junie studied him. You can't promise everything. No, Cade said. But I can promise process. Junie tilted her head. What's that? It means if something stops working, we talk about it. We don't disappear. Junie swallowed. People disappear. Cade didn't argue. They do, but I won't. Junie looked down at her hands. If someone official gets involved, Will they separate us? The question landed heavy, but it wasn't panicked. It was practical. Cade answered carefully. Any plan we make puts staying together first. That's non-negotiable. Junie searched his face, then nodded slow, deliberate. Okay. Miles returned from the quiet room calm, carrying a drawing of a loaf with a smile. He handed it to Junie. She took it like a gift. Cade felt something warm settle in his chest. Junie folded the drawing and placed it in her pocket. Later, she said again. Cade smiled. Later. Outside, the snow kept falling. But inside the community center, something had shifted, subtle and real. For the first time, Junie wasn't guarding bread. She was guarding hope. Cade did not offer a house. He did not offer money directly. That mattered. Instead, he did what adults were supposed to do when children were involved. He slowed everything down and made the next step visible. The meeting happened at the community center in a bright room with windows facing the harbor. Chairs were arranged in a loose circle. No desk, no barriers. Tessa Rourke, the family advocate, arrived first. No uniform, no badge on display. Just a notebook and a calm presence that didn't rush children into answers. Junie sat with her hands folded in her sleeves. Miles leaned against her side thumb, pressed to the seam of her coat. Tessa crouched slightly so she was at eye level. Hi, Junie. Hi, Miles. My job is to help families make things easier, especially when a lot changes at once. Junie didn't nod. She watched. Tessa didn't push. She spoke slowly, explaining what support could look like: school meal programs, quiet spaces for Miles, after-school care that didn't overwhelm him, and help for their mom until things stabilized. Junie interrupted once. Will this make people ask questions at school? Tessa answered honestly. Some, but only the kind that help teachers understand how to support you, not judge you. Junie considered that. Cade stayed quiet, resisting every instinct to fill the space. This wasn't his moment. Then Tessa mentioned paperwork. Junie's shoulders tightened immediately. Paperwork doesn't mean trouble, Tessa said gently, noticing the shift. It means protection. It means plans are written down so kids don't have to remember everything. Junie's voice came small. I remember things so they don't get missed. Cade felt that line cut straight through him. Tessa nodded, respectful. That makes sense. But it's heavy work. We can share it. Junie looked at Miles, then back at Tessa. What if it stops working? Then we adjust, Tessa said. No surprises, no disappearing. Junie glanced at Cade, testing the promise. Cade nodded once. We review it together. Silence followed, not tense but weighty. Finally, Junie whispered, Okay, but we go slow. Tessa smiled. Slow is responsible. And for the first time since the bakery, Junie didn't feel like the only adult in the room. Their mother arrived late. Not dramatically, just breathless coat, half-zipped hair pulled back in a hurry. Marin Marlowe paused at the doorway, eyes sweeping the room until they landed on Junie and Miles. Relief crossed her face, followed immediately by guilt. I'm sorry, Marin said before she even sat down. Traffic. I ran. Junie didn't move. She didn't scold. She didn't rush forward. She simply watched like she always did. Marin knelt in front of them. Are you okay? Miles nodded. Junie hesitated. We're fine, Junie said carefully. Marin's eyes flicked to the advocate, to Cade. I didn't know it got this tight, she admitted. I thought I had it under control. Tessa spoke calmly. A lot changed at once. That doesn't make you careless. It means support matters. Marin swallowed. Junie. Did you? Junie lifted her chin. I handled it. Marin's breath caught not in anger but heartbreak. She reached for Junie's hands. Junie let her, but only lightly. Cade watched the exchange with care. This wasn't abandonment. This was strain, quiet, human, temporary. They talked through the plan again, this time with Marin included. Meal assistance, schedule support, Community care, all lawful, all transparent. Marin looked at Cade. You didn't have to get involved, Cade answered honestly. I didn't want Junie thinking this was her job alone. Junie flinched at that, not in denial, but recognition. Marin's eyes filled. Junie, I didn't mean for you to carry it. Junie's voice was steady but smaller now. I didn't mind. Marin shook her head gently. I did. That mattered. They agreed on a temporary support agreement, nothing permanent, nothing forced, just enough structure to keep the kids steady while Marin caught her breath. When the meeting ended, Marin hugged Junie longer than usual. Junie didn't pull away. She didn't fully relax either. But she stayed. And for Cade, that was the difference between survival and healing beginning. To finalize the support plan, a short legal review was required. Not a courtroom, a private meeting room warm and quiet with drawings on the walls and a low table set with crayons. Judge Elena Kwan chose it that way on purpose. Miles sat with a counselor completing a puzzle. Junie sat in a chair too big for her legs, feet swinging just above the floor. Judge Kwan smiled. Hi, Junie. You can call me Ms. Kwan. Junie nodded. Okay. Ms. Kwan spoke plainly. I'm here to make sure adults are doing their jobs so kids don't have to do them. Junie's hands tightened in her sleeves. Do you know why we're meeting? The judge asked. Junie answered honestly. So we don't mess it up, Miss. Kwan shook her head gently. So we write it down the right way. Junie blinked. Ms. Kwan reviewed the plan in simple language. Support stays in place, family stays together, changes are explained before they happen. Then she asked the only question that mattered. Junie, what's the most important part to you? Junie didn't answer right away. She looked at Miles. He looked back. That we don't get separated, Junie said quietly. Ms. Kwan nodded. That's reasonable. Cade felt his chest tighten. Do you feel safe with this plan? The judge asked. Junie took a breath. Yes. Do you feel heard? Junie hesitated, then nodded. Yes. Ms. Kwan smiled. Then we're doing our job. She signed the document slow and deliberate. This plan exists to support you, not define you. Junie stared at the paper like it might disappear. It didn't. As they stood to leave, Junie glanced at Cade. Later, she asked, still testing. Cade smiled softly. Later. And for the first time, that word didn't sound like fear. It sounded like time finally on her side. The follow-up meeting was scheduled 3 weeks later. Not because anything had gone wrong, but because good plans are checked, not assumed. Junie understood that. She just didn't like how the word review made her stomach tighten. The room was the same as before. Same windows, same drawings on the walls, same calm adults who spoke slowly and waited their turn. But something had changed. This time, Junie wasn't just listening. She was being asked. Judge Kwan folded her hands on the table. Junie, today isn't about deciding your future. It's about checking whether the support we set up is working the way it should. Junie nodded. She'd practiced nodding in mirrors in hallways in quiet places where adults liked agreement. Your teachers say you're doing well, the judge continued. Miles seems calmer. The routine is helping. Junie nodded again. Then the judge asked gently, what's still hard? The room went quiet, not tense but attentive. Junie opened her mouth, then closed it. Cade felt it instantly, the way she leaned back into herself like she was stepping behind a wall she'd built long ago. You don't have to answer right away, Judge Kwan said. Junie stared at her hands. It's okay if something is still hard, the judge added. That doesn't mean the plan failed. Junie swallowed. Finally, she spoke. I don't know when I'm allowed to stop watching. Cade's chest tightened. Judge Kwan tilted her head. Watching what Junie hesitated, then said it plainly, without drama, without accusation. Everything. The word landed heavy. Junie continued, voice steady but small. I still check the door before I sleep. I still count food even when there's enough. I still make lists in my head in case someone forgets. Marin's breath caught. Junie didn't look at her. She kept her eyes on the table like she was afraid if she looked up, she'd be told she was doing something wrong again. Judge Kwan didn't rush. Thank you for telling us that, she said. That's important information. Junie blinked. I thought, if I said that, it meant I wasn't grateful. Cade leaned forward before he could stop himself. No, he said softly. It means you've been carrying a habit longer than the problem. Junie glanced at him, surprised. Judge Kwan nodded. Exactly. Sometimes kids learn survival skills that don't turn off right away. Our job is to help you feel safe enough to rest, Junie whispered. I don't know how. The honesty cracked something open in the room. Judge Kwan smiled kindly. Then we practice. Together. Junie breathed out slowly. For the first time, she hadn't answered like a perfect child. She'd answered like a real one. After the meeting, Junie went with a counselor to check on Miles. That left Cade alone in the hallway with Judge Kwan. She didn't waste time. You're careful, she said. That's good. But I want to ask you something. Cade nodded. Of course. Why does this matter to you, the judge asked. Not the foundation, not the plan, this family. Cade leaned back against the wall, the polished floor suddenly too bright. He hadn't prepared an answer. He'd avoided needing one. But Judge Kwan wasn't asking as an obstacle. She was asking as a safeguard. Cade exhaled. Because I missed it once. The judge waited. My daughter Cade continued. She was like Junie. Quiet. Responsible. Everyone said she was easy. His voice roughened. I believed them. Judge Kwan didn't interrupt. I thought because she wasn't asking she didn't need, Cade said. I thought because she was capable she was okay. He swallowed. She wasn't. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was respectful. I can't fix that, Cade said quietly. But I can recognize it when I see it again. Judge Kwan nodded. That recognition is what keeps this ethical. Cade looked up. Ethical, yes, she said. Because you're not rescuing, you're responding, and you're willing to be supervised. That mattered more than praise. Junie returned Miles beside her holding a folded paper. What's that? Cade asked. Miles held it up proudly. It's a map. Junie explained, it's for later, in case we forget where things are. Cade felt a familiar ache. Junie added carefully, Ms. Lena says we can make maps until we don't need them. Cade smiled. That sounds right. They walked out together. As they reached the doors, Junie slowed. Cade, she asked. Yes, if I stop watching. Will you still notice me? The question cut deep, but it wasn't fear. It was attachment learning to trust. Cade crouched to her level. I notice you now, he said. Not because you're responsible. Because you're you. Junie nodded, absorbing that slowly. Then she said, okay. Not as a promise. As permission. The breakthrough didn't happen in court. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. Junie was at the community center helping set out snacks by choice supervised normal. She liked arranging things. Order made the room quieter in her head. A fresh loaf of bread sat on the counter, warm, unwrapped. Junie reached for it without thinking and automatically tucked it under her arm, angling her coat the way she always had. Then she froze. Her hands stopped. She stared down at what she was doing, confusion flickering across her face like she'd caught herself speaking an old language. Miss Lena noticed, but didn't react. Marin nearby said nothing. Cade, standing by the doorway, felt his breath catch. Junie whispered, I don't need to. Her hands trembled. But my body thinks I do. Cade took one slow step forward. That makes sense, he said gently. Your body learned fast. Junie's eyes filled, frustrated. I don't want to be like this. Marin moved closer. You're not broken, she said softly. You're practiced. Junie laughed once, wet and shaky. I practiced too hard. Cade's chest tightened. He saw his daughter again, not as memory, but as warning. Junie took a breath. Then very deliberately, she placed the loaf back on the counter. Out in the open. She stepped back like she was giving something up. The room stayed quiet. Nothing bad happened. No one took it. No one scolded her. No one rushed in. Junie waited. Seconds passed. Then she let her shoulders drop. I put it down, she said, almost surprised. Cade nodded, voice thick. You did. Junie wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed. I'm not a bad kid. Cade shook his head, tears finally breaking free. No, he said. You're a good kid who learned to carry too much. Junie looked at him, something easing in her expression. She turned back to the table and began setting plates, slow calm, no urgency. Miles came in, saw the bread, and asked, Is it for now? Junie smiled. Yes, she said. Not later, now. And for the first time, Junie didn't save the loaf. She trusted the room to hold it, and she trusted herself enough to let go. Cade hadn't expected it to happen like this. Not in a courtroom, not in a speech, not during some dramatic announcement that people could point to later and say that was the moment. It happened in the community center kitchen under fluorescent lights that buzzed too softly to be important. Junie was setting plates again. Not because anyone asked her to, because it calmed her. She aligned the edges carefully, one after another, counting silently in her head. Miles sat nearby, humming as he drew looping lines that turned into boats. Cade leaned against the counter, listening to the ordinary sounds, dishes touching a chair, scraping a heater, clicking on. This was what stability sounded like. Junie reached for the bread basket. She hesitated, then took out 3 rolls. She placed one in front of Miles, one in front of Marin. She held the third for a moment, then placed it on an empty plate. For later, she said automatically. The words were old muscle memory. Then she froze. Her eyes widened slightly. She looked at the roll, then at Cade. I don't need to say that anymore, she whispered. Cade felt something crack, not loudly, not violently, but completely. He turned his face away, gripping the edge of the counter as tears came hot, unexpected, impossible to stop. Junie stiffened. Did I do something wrong? Cade shook his head, voice breaking. No, you did something right. Marin stepped closer, placing a steady hand on Junie's shoulder. Honey, Cade's just feeling a lot. Junie frowned, studying Cade's shaking shoulders. You're sad, she said, not accusing, observing. Yes, Cade managed, but it's the good kind. Junie tilted her head. Why? Cade took a breath, then another. He turned back to her eyes, wet, unguarded. Because you just put something down, he said. Something you shouldn't have had to carry. Junie stared at him, processing. My daughter, Cade continued softly, never learned how to do that. And I didn't notice in time. The room went still. Junie didn't look scared. She looked understanding. I noticed, she said quietly. Sometimes adults don't see quiet kids. The sentence landed like a bell. Cade covered his face again, not in shame but release. Junie stepped forward, slow, unsure, and placed her small hand on his sleeve. I see you, she said. That was it. That was the moment Cade Whitlock broke open, not as a billionaire, not as a helper, but as a human being finally allowed to grieve and heal in the same breath. The 3-month review happened on a bright spring morning. Junie wore a navy sweater she'd chosen herself. Miles held a small sensory keychain that clicked softly when he squeezed it. Marin looked rested, not perfect, but grounded. Cade sat behind them, hands folded, not speaking unless asked. Judge Kwan smiled as they entered. You all look different, she said gently. Junie blinked. Different, how lighter, the judge replied. The meeting was brief by design. Updates were shared, school accommodations, working meals, consistent routines, steady. The plan had done what it was supposed to do. Then Judge Kwan turned to Junie. Junie, do you remember the first thing you told me you needed? Junie nodded. That we stay together. And did that happen? Yes. Judge Kwan smiled. Is there anything else you want us to know? Junie hesitated. Old Junie would have stayed silent. This Junie stood. I used to think if I stopped paying attention, she said slowly, everything would fall apart. The adults listened. No one interrupted. But I tried something new, Junie continued. I let other people notice things. She glanced at Marin, at Cade, at the advocate. And it didn't get worse, she said. It got smaller. Cade's throat tightened. Judge Kwan nodded, eyes bright. That's an important discovery. Junie swallowed. I'm still learning, but I don't feel like it's all on me anymore. The judge signed the continuation of the support plan, lighter touch, now less oversight needed. This arrangement remains in place, she said, with the understanding that the goal is always stability, without pressure. She looked directly at Junie. You are not responsible for holding adults together. Junie's eyes filled. She didn't wipe them away. She let the feeling exist. Miles tugged her sleeve. Is it over? Junie smiled at him. Yeah, it is. Judge Kwan closed the folder. Then we're done here. No gavel. No drama. Just a quiet ending to a chapter that had once felt endless. They gathered at the community center for lunch a week later. Nothing fancy. Soup, bread, fruit cut into uneven pieces that made Miles laugh. Junie helped set the table, but this time she didn't count plates obsessively. She placed them where they fit, not where they had to be. Cade arrived last and paused in the doorway. The room looked whole. Marin stirred the soup. Ms. Darlene chatted with Tessa near the window. Miles proudly arranged his drawing in the center of the table, a loaf of bread with stick figures holding hands around it. Junie noticed Cade lingering and waved him in. Sit, she said. Cade did. The bread basket sat in the middle of the table, full. Junie looked at it for a long moment. Then she reached in and took a roll, not hiding it, not saving it. She placed it on Miles's plate, then Marin's, then Tessa's. She paused, holding the last roll. Cade held his breath. Junie placed it gently in front of him. For you, she said. Cade blinked. Me, Junie nodded. You were hungry too. Cade laughed softly through sudden tears. I was. They began to eat. No rush. No fear. Miles slurped soup happily. Marin leaned back in her chair, exhaling like someone who finally believed tomorrow would show up. Junie chewed slowly, eyes drifting around the table. This feels different, she said. How? Cade asked. Junie thought. Like I don't have to remember everything. Cade smiled. That's the idea. Junie nodded, satisfied. She reached for another roll, then stopped herself. She laughed. I forgot to be worried, she said. The table went quiet, not sad, but full. Outside, spring light touched the windows. Inside, a child who had once hidden bread in her coat sat at a table where nothing needed hiding anymore. And for Cade Whitlock, that was the truest kind of rescue there was. The first real sign came quietly. Junie didn't notice it at first. None of them did. It was a Tuesday afternoon at the community center, ordinary in every possible way. Homework time had ended. Miles was building a careful tower of wooden blocks on the floor, humming under his breath. Marin sat near the window, filling out paperwork that no longer felt like an emergency. Cade was there too, answering emails he didn't need to rush. Junie was drawing. Not organizing, not planning, just drawing. She colored a house with uneven walls and windows that didn't match. She added a table inside, 4 chairs, a basket in the middle. Ms. Darlene leaned over. What's that? Junie looked at her picture. Dinner, she said simply. Ms. Darlene smiled. Looks nice. Junie nodded and kept coloring. She didn't add labels. She didn't explain who sat where. She didn't check the door. Later, when snack time came, Junie stood up and walked to the kitchen. She reached the counter, saw the bread, and paused. For a heartbeat, everyone watched. Old habits don't disappear all at once. They loosen. Junie picked up the bread, then set it down again, without hiding it, without glancing over her shoulder. She took plates instead. Cade felt his chest tighten, not with fear, but wonder. Junie carried the plates back to the table, set them down, and only then returned for the bread. She didn't rush. She didn't count. She smiled. "Food's ready," she said. Miles looked up. Warm, Junie nodded. Warm. And that was it. No ceremony, no lesson announced, just a small moment where Junie forgot to be vigilant. Cade watched her laugh at something Miles said, the sound light and unguarded. He realized this was what healing looked like when it wasn't trying to impress anyone. It wasn't dramatic. It was forgetting. Forgetting to brace. Forgetting to prepare for loss. Forgetting to be the emergency plan. Cade turned away for a second, pressing his fingers together to ground himself. Because the most beautiful thing he'd seen all year wasn't wealth or success or generosity. It was a child who finally felt safe enough to be absent-minded. Months later, Cade Whitlock stood on a stage anyway. Not for Junie, not for Miles, for donors, for city officials, for the polished world that liked clean stories with big numbers. He spoke about community partnerships, about sustainable programs, about preventative support systems. People applauded. They always did. But there was something Cade never said into a microphone. He never told them that the most important lesson he'd learned hadn't come from a boardroom or a policy brief. It came from a loaf of bread hidden inside a child's coat. When interviews asked what inspired his renewed focus on child welfare, Cade kept his answer vague. "I learned that silence doesn't mean strength," he said. "Sometimes it means children are doing adult work alone." That was all. What he didn't say, what he kept for himself, was this. He had learned how easy it was to miss quiet kids, how praise could be a blindfold, how "she's so mature" could mean she's exhausted. Cade changed the way his foundation worked. No emergency branding, no spotlight rescues, just systems that noticed early, programs that asked questions gently, schools that treated routine as care, not control, bread tabs in bakeries, quiet rooms in schools, advocates who listened before they solved. Sometimes, when no one was watching, Cade would open his wallet and look at an old folded receipt. A loaf, soup, 2 rolls. He kept it not as guilt, but as calibration, a reminder of what help should feel like. That evening, Cade left the event early and drove to the community center. Junie was there, helping Miles with homework. Marin waved from the doorway. Junie looked up when she saw him. "Hi," she said. "Hi," Cade replied. No awe, no dependence, just recognition. Cade sat down at the table and helped Miles sound out a word. He didn't fix anything. He stayed. And that Cade had learned was the difference. Sunday morning arrived softly. Sunlight slipped through the windows of the community center kitchen, warming the counters and turning dust into something gentle. Marin was brewing coffee. Miles was still in his socks, building a careful line of toy cars along the floor. Junie stood at the counter. A fresh loaf of bread rested there, still warm. She picked up the knife, held it, then paused. Her fingers loosened. She set the knife down. Cade watched from the doorway, heart steady but alert. He didn't move. He didn't interrupt. Junie lifted the loaf with both hands and carried it to the table whole. She placed it in the center. Marin looked up, surprised. "No cutting," Junie shook her head. "We can do it together." They sat. Junie broke the bread with her hands instead of slicing it. The pieces were uneven, some bigger, some smaller. No one complained. Miles took a bite and grinned. "It's good." Junie smiled back. Cade reached for his piece, then stopped. He looked at Junie. May I? Junie nodded. Yes. He ate slowly. The room felt settled, like something had clicked into place, and decided to stay. After a moment, Junie spoke. I used to think if I didn't plan everything, it would all disappear, she said. Marin reached for her hand. Cade listened. But now Junie continued searching for the right words. It feels like tomorrow is normal. Cade smiled softly. That's the goal. Junie nodded. I like normal. She looked at the bread, still more left. She didn't rush to save it. She trusted it would remain. Outside, the city moved on. Ferries came and went. Winter finally loosened its grip. Inside, a child who once hid bread no longer needed to, because the bread stayed whole, because the table stayed full, because love, when done right, doesn't rescue loudly, it stays. Did this story leave a lasting impression on you? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment, rate it from 1 to 10, and tap the end screen to see another heartwarming story waiting for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, then tap the bell icon so you don't miss any new stories. Until our next story.